So maybe you've got a switch Lite that's damaged and you need to replace some parts, or simply you want to see what's inside the switch. I'm going to show you how to completely tear down this switch Lite, as well as reassemble it, but we'll first do a complete disassembly, and even removing the touchscreen and reassembling everything, showing you where every screw goes, so that you have a real nice guide for tear down and rebuild. I know with a lot of the disassembly videos, one thing that annoys me is not being able to see exactly which screw sizes go where, and close-up views. So I'm going to make sure to use the scope on this one and get nice and close to show you the exact screws we use, how I disassemble it and keep things in order, and then reassembling it back together. So let's just dive in and strip this switch Lite down. So to start with, we've got the switch Lite itself, and what we'll need, not many tools. You'll want a screwdriver, you'll want a Y00 tip, so a tri-wing tip, 00 is the perfect size. We sell this kit on our store, and it comes with everything you need. So in this kit, you can see we've got the Y00 here, and we want a Phillips 0 here, basically a standard screwdriver, if you will, a crosshead screwdriver. Now, Y single 0, as well as 00, as well as 000 will all fit, but technically you want the Y00 and you want a Phillips 0. These are the ideal sizes. And you can see the tips there, basically a tri-wing and a Phillips. We'll start with the tri-wing. And then one thing you'll need, depending on if you want to go all the way down to removing the touchscreen and replacing the LCD, is you'll need some kind of flexible metal, ideally. Thin, flexible metal. Again, we sell these on the store. Or you can use these slightly firmer metal pry tools again. And they'll be used to basically wedge under here, lift up. You ideally want a suction cup to start with, to lift up and pry, and then get in. But if you have a really thin one like this, you can find that often you can just wedge in like this and lift up without any suction cup. So I'll show you that near the end of the teardown, but it's not a necessity. So let's start with the screws first. So we want to go around the edge. So we have 2 Phillips on the top, we have 2 Phillips on the bottom by the USB-C port, and we have 4 tri-wings on the back. So starting with the back, we'll just take the 4 tri-wings out. Once those are out, swap the tip over to the posi tip, remove the one by the game cart, and then the ones by the USB-C. So with them out, you can see what screws we have is 4 tri-wing long screws and 4 short Phillips. To remove the back cover now, you can see this line running all along the edge of the screen. You can just simply get your finger in there to start the separation, like that. And you're best starting from this side because you want to lift over this headphone port. So this headphone port will stop it coming off. So we start down by here. You can see it just cracks open, come down the sides, and the back lifts off there. If you turn over now, you can see this headphone socket is what we want to lift over, as well as these buttons. So the back triggers, you kind of bring in the shell over these buttons, and then it lifts up like that. So the only thing it'll kind of catch on is this headphone connector there. Once the back's off, I first place this aside, and now what I do to keep track of where screws go is I take the thing that the screws are mainly attached to, so in this case this. I'll get some Kapton tape or any kind of tape, and then I just get the screws, stick them to the tape, and then stick them to the actual piece that it's come off. And now I've got this I can put to one side with all the screws related to putting this back on, and then we bring the console back in. So the next step, you can do it in many different ways. There's no real, you can do like various different orders, but I'll start with the back plate. So if we just start with this screw at the top left. So there's 4 screws in total, and you'll notice this one's actually a different colour than the rest and slightly different length. So the gold one is down here. We could take this separately to this corner, which we will, and the other 3 are generic. This metal cage should lift off. If we start from this side, kind of clicks out and then lifts off. So again, to keep the screws organized, we'll take this plate, take a bit of tape and attach the longer screw to where it's going to be. And the other 3 screws can just go in the middle. So now we have, again, a nice secured piece with the screws all attached. Whenever you're taking apart something, the main thing you want to do as soon as you can is disconnect the battery. Mainly because this circuit board's effectively live at the minute, and if you accidentally short things with screwdrivers, you can cause damage. So we will remove this ribbon first just to get to this battery. This flap just lifts up. So you can just lift it with your fingers or tweezers. Once it's up, you can just pull this ribbon out. That gets you out the way to being able to get to the battery. To get the battery out again, just basically flick up. So I like to go from that end and just flick up. And with the battery disconnected now, this board will now have no power. So we can dismantle this in many different orders. I first remove this heat bar. So using any tool, your fingernail, a screwdriver, a scraper, this foam is holding the copper pipe to the fan, and it just holds it there in a gap. So you can see how that just goes in and kind of cuts through the foam. That's the only thing holding this down. We will then remove the 3 screws, here, here, and here. Again, Phillips. I think the Phillips all the way now. I don't think we go back to the tri-wing. And this holds the heatsink onto the CPU. So we remove these 3 screws. And then this should now lift out the back here and lift off. And you can see there's a little bit of resistance there because obviously the thermal paste is keeping it adhered to the copper. But that's it. Once it's off, it's off. Move that to one side, and again, we will attach the screws to the copper pipe. So there's another piece out the way. Next up, we could remove the fan. So before removing the fan, we want to flick up this connector here, which is for the CPU. So again, just get our fingers or tweezers, flick that little grey bar up, and pull the ribbon out. Otherwise, when you take the fan out, you might tug that and do some damage. With that out, we'll remove the 3 black screws. Put the fan to one side. Next, we'll remove the headphone jack and the game cart reader that come out at the same time. So for this, we have the screws where you can see them obviously, and a single ribbon cable. So do the same for this ribbon cable. Always remove the ribbon cable first, so that when you come to remove the component, you don't tug on the ribbon cable. And then with the 7 screws out, these 2 boards just lift out together. All the screws again are the same size and they're all Phillips. And then we'll put the game cart and headphone jack to one side. Let's jump over and just get this power button assembly out the way. So same again, this time we flick the black connector up on the right side and then just simply remove the cable. And that's all there is to that piece. We could next remove the triggers. So triggers have 2 screws for each one. And they just lift out gently. And you'll see the assembly is just that. It just rocks back and forward and presses on this rubber. So you place the rubber over the circle, and when you have the trigger in use, the back trigger, it basically rocks and presses down. That's how that works. So we have the trigger there, 2 screws the same size, and a rubber. We'll do the same for the other side. Just turn them over and kind of attach them together. So it's just a loose assembly to keep everything in one place when you have a pile of bits. These front bumpers you might as well remove, they just lift out. So be just careful when you lift out because there's a spring here. So if you just lift out carefully, and you'll have the spring that sits inside the trigger. And you can put them to one side. As long as you don't move them much, you're fine. You don't need to really tape anything. Just remove them gently so that the spring just releases and doesn't fly off. Next up, let's remove this main logic board. We'll flick up the 2 ribbons here. The whites flick up and the black flicks up. And then you just remove the ribbons out of the way. These antennas for Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Again, I'd probably recommend, to be honest, tweezers under there and flick gently. You want to be careful with these because you can rip off the actual connectors on here. So these are only soldered onto the board by small pads. So when you're lifting them, I try and get the tweezers underneath and sort of gently lift up. Generally, you're always okay, but if you are too harsh with those, you can pull these off the board and then it's a pain to resolder them. And there's one more ribbon over here for the Joy-Con. Just lift up the black tab and remove the Joy-Con ribbon. And then now we should be able to just remove the screws to lift this main board out. And you'll notice this is a different color and a different length. So we'll want to keep those two separate. And you'll notice these are the same length as the other screw. So we only have two types. And finally, one gold one on the speaker. So we have 3 gold and 3 silver screws. And then this circuit board then, if you gently and slowly lift, you should find comes out. And you'll find the speaker here is still attached to the housing, just sort of by a rubber seal. So you just lift that gently at the bottom and it will kind of break away the seal. And then the speaker will come out with the logic board. Then you're left with this here. And let's just take a look at the main logic board. So we have the speaker still attached, and we can now remove the speaker by just pulling the connector out here gently. Try not to put too much force on the wires. And again, if you have tweezers, you could get the tweezers to grip the actual connector block like this and lift up instead of tugging on the wires. So it puts less stress on it. Once that's out, the speaker assembly comes off. If you want to replace the speaker, I'll just quickly show you. It's just removing these 3 screws. And then this cover just removes, and your speaker's inside to just lift out and replace. Once it's done, you just place this back on. You'll notice there's a little slot for where the wires go, so make sure they stay in that groove. I'm just going to reassemble this for now though. We're not doing a speaker swap. So we'll just put the speaker to one side. And now we have the screws for the main board here. So if you're going to work on the main board, obviously repairing the main board is a different topic than teardown, but you can remove the metal cages from around the chip areas. And you can also see on the back here, the D-pad rubber is attached. So I'm just going to peel that back off for now and put it back with the shell. But this is now your main board out ready to work on. I'm not going to tape over the thermal paste. I don't really want to remove any of that. And there's the main board out. We now have some loose parts here we want to remove. We have the D-pad rubber, we have the plus button rubber, we have the actual physical buttons we'll just tip up in a minute and take out. We have the home button rubber, and then the home button. So I'm just going to tip these out to get them all out. So we have buttons and rubbers, which we'll just put to one side. Joy-Con you could now swap out. So Joy-Con is just 2 screws. When you're about to remove the thumbstick, you'll see it has this black plastic membrane here. Try and keep that still kind of adhered to the board. And if you twist it backwards this way and come forward, you'll see it's got an opening here. It comes out. So kind of twist up and lift through that membrane, so the membrane stays down. So from this angle, it would look like kind of twisting up and lifting out. What we have left under here is the touchscreen and the LCD. So the touchscreen is the screen on top here, and the LCD is the actual screen below the touchscreen. You don't have to take them out. That's pretty much as far as most people go on that side, but we will go and strip it down fully in a moment. So let's focus on the left Joy-Con area now. We'll lift up this ribbon again and remove the ribbon cable. We'll remove the Joy-Con ribbon cable down here. And we'll remove the bridging ribbon here. So if we lift up the white tab, this is the ribbon that joins 2 boards together. You can see it basically runs downside the battery, up and around, and it's kind of glued to the metal frame. So you can just peel that out if you want to remove and replace that. If you don't need to replace it, I wouldn't peel it out because you risk damaging the cable. The same goes for these antennas. If you ever need to replace these antennas, you can see that they go down and they solder to this little metal cage with 1 screw holding it in. So all there is to that is remove that 1 screw and resolder the 2 parts of the wire to this assembly. If you don't need to do that, again, I wouldn't bother removing that part. And the same at the top, the black antenna goes 1 screw here and it's soldered the underside of these 2 pieces of metal. And then this would just lift out. As before, let's remove the 1 screw for the speaker and the 2 other screws holding the circuit board down. So we have 1 silver here, 1 gold here, and another gold in the speaker. Now before we can remove the circuit board, you'll see a sneaky little screw down here under the speaker. So in this instance, we can't remove the board and the speaker together. So let's just first remove the speaker connector. Same again, if we have to break the seal down here that sometimes keeps the speaker in, we can gently lift the speaker out. Same applies for this speaker. If you want to swap it, remove the 3 screws. That exposes the final screw holding this circuit board in. And then one more hidden screw under here. And that leaves us with 2 silver screws, which both have a wider gold pad on, and the 3 golds have smaller heads on. We can then lift the circuit board out carefully, and always do it carefully in case you forgot to disconnect something or unscrew something. You shouldn't ever need much force. That removes the circuit board, and you can see there is a slightly dirty rubber attached to it, and that's that little circuit board. So you'd rarely need to take this side out. It's only really if you want to swap the Joy-Con or you're having issues with the rubbers. Same again, we have some loose components now. We have the D-pad rubber and the D-pad. We have the minus button and the button for the minus. And we have the circle button and the button for the circle. Another Joy-Con. And the same again, put your finger under to lift out, tilt towards me, and lift out that way. So you're always lifting out away from this flap. And that is as far as most teardowns need to go. The battery is super hard to remove, and to be honest, the only time you'd want to remove this battery is to replace it. The best way of doing that is to warm up the battery area as much as possible. Get a kind of flexible piece in wherever you can, and sort of pry under and try and remove the glue. There is absolutely no easy way to remove the battery from the switch Lite. They haven't used easy remove glue tabs. They have basically stuck this down with a massive piece of glue. So it really is not a serviceable part. I'll probably do an independent video if you want to replace the battery on attempting to do it safely and find the best way of doing it. But this is the only piece we're going to leave in this shell because there really is no reason to pretty much damage this battery when removing it. So you'll see on this backboard there's a few screws left. Let's just remove those. You'll notice the first one was long. This one is much shorter. That's much shorter. And that's much shorter. So the longer screw is for the top. With those screws out now, you'll find that this assembly, if you carefully lift it off, so you'll see when this is off, it allows us to apply some heat here if we did want to remove the battery. So I'd apply the heat gun here and try and get the battery off there. And there's effectively your battery assembly with your bridging ribbons and Wi-Fi antennas as an assembly. Now before we forget the screw order, let's remember to put the 3 smaller screws in the general area and the longer screw near the longer area. There's the backboard. The LCD is stuck to the touchscreen, and the touchscreen is stuck to the front of this plastic. So now bear in mind when this is out, this is very flexible and very easy to damage your LCD. So once that back support's off, this is flexible and damageable. What I would start by doing is leave the LCD where it is because it's adhered to the touchscreen, and we'll warm up and pry off this touchscreen. I'd also recommend using a little sucker cup to stick to the screen to give you some ability to pull. So before we put that on, however, let's just get some hot air and warm this up. Also bear in mind, the ribbon is here. So look at this side here, and there's a ribbon here. So you don't want to start this area. You want to be careful. This is the LCD ribbon, so you're not going to catch that. But this is the touchscreen ribbon. So you want to avoid this area with your pry tools because you could slice through the ribbon. So we could start up here, work our way around this way, and then just lift up with a hand from there. So let's just first get some heat on. And it doesn't need a huge amount of heat, but it does need some heat. And if you're going to use a heat gun, you've got to bear in mind, you should just about be able to put your hand under the heat without it burning your fingers. It only needs to be a split second because it will get warm. But if you can't withstand your hand under the heat gun, you're too close or too hot. And you want to really get it so it's quite warm to the touch. But you don't want to get it that warm that obviously you melt something or damage something. And you can see I'm only focusing on the ring. I'm not going into the center where the LCD is, there's no need. So that's add a little bit. And if you work fast, probably with this tool is easier. and you can see I can get the tool in. Once the tool's in, the pressure's kind of off, you could gently go around the edge then, and you can see the only reason you'd really use this is to get your initial leverage. I can now comfortably go around the edge, and just remember what I mentioned, don't go near here with this tool, you'll end up cutting through the ribbon. So you can take this off for now, carry on around, and just have your tool in just enough that you're breaking the seal. If we look under here as well, we have a ribbon here. So I wouldn't go past halfway here, I'd just go to there. So we're safely done around here and sort of say to the center of that deep edge you're safe. After that, I'd either try and just lift by hand over that area, so we can start the sponger tool further down, or again, remember not to bend the whole board, just leave the bigger tool in the back there so it can't fall back through. And you'll notice it's also completely through the LCD. So the LCD comes with the touchscreen, as I mentioned. It's all attached as one at the minute. So if we just wedge that between there so the adhesive strip doesn't stick back down, we want to now warm up this side, so the bottom half, because we don't want to go near here and we don't want to go here. So we'll get the heat gun again down this corner. Should be enough. Get the suction cup on. Get the pry tool ready, and again I'm pushing down on the actual console to try and not bend it. Get the tool in a gap, lift up with the sucker cup and just wedge in, and as soon as you've got that purchase inside you can remove this, and then we can just carefully go down the bottom side now. We want to now try and free this side so we can lift up. So for that, we'll come around, and again, don't go past halfway past the D-pad because of that ribbon. And we have this bit here, and we could apply a little bit of force, gently bowing this up, and apply a bit of warmth here to release the adhesion. And there you can see, without any real pressure, we've managed to now remove this. And you can see why we didn't want to go close to there, because otherwise we'd have cut through this ribbon here if you're not careful. That's the LCD ribbon. So that's why you can see position wise, you can kind of safely come down with your tool to realistically the bottom of the D-pad, but never go beyond the D-pad. You can come up from this corner, up to say center of the circle. They're your two safe points. They're all in the same position on the switch lights, so you don't need to worry about that. Again, try and keep the LCD straight. So with that in now, we've already removed the adhesion from here and here. There's only the bit left there. So we can hold the screen and instead move the shell, the plastic that won't break. And we can use this to, again, get the tool under if you really want to. And just work down that back piece. And again, I'm not going in much here because of this cable here. And there we go, with the last little tug, we'll have the frame off and the adhesion comes away. You're left now with the front shell, nothing left to it, and the LCD and touch panel assembly with the adhesive strip on. It depends if you're going to replace this touchscreen. You'd rarely take it this far if you weren't going to replace this touchscreen. So I might as well replace this touchscreen so we get a nice new screen with no scratches on. And in which case this adhesive strip doesn't really matter, but if you were going to reuse it, just stick it back down. Now you've still got to separate the LCD from the touchscreen. It's exactly the same way. Apply some heat and really gently get your separator tool in the gap to separate the touchscreen from the LCD. Now the gap between the LCD and the touchscreen, as you can see, is this white border here. So we will want to pry it off between the white and the black. and then that's separated the touchscreen from the LCD. Now, I wouldn't normally say you'd ever separate these without breaking them. They're so fragile that when you're doing this kind of disassembly or getting a tool in here, you're almost inevitably going to destroy the touchscreen or the LCD. But that's how you separate the two. And we'll use some new ones for reassembly, so we have a brand new LCD and touchscreen. But I wouldn't say attempt to separate these two with the expectation that you're actually not going to damage one or the other. It's very difficult. So if you're going to replace one, I'd expect to buy both and replace both. So there you can see all the switch Lite completely disassembled. So now it's time to put all this back together in a complete reassembly. We'll do that in a separate video, so it's easy for you guys to find the point at which you disassemble versus reassemble. And hopefully this will be the only video you need to completely tear down your switch Lite.